Welcome to the Manufacturing Shakeup. We're your hosts, Ellen Feldman-Ornato
and Jenny Drescher. We're talking with dynamic women from across the manufacturing scene in Connecticut. Friends, you remember that time you looked at that LinkedIn post and you saw somebody's really super cool comment and they got 1,000 likes and all kinds of comments that said, oh, yeah. And you just had that moment when you thought, oh, what about me? What am I, chopped liver? I don't feel great about me. We've all been there. We've all had that moment when we just looked at somebody else's post on Facebook or LinkedIn and thought, I'm just not enough. Well, our guest today has some really cool and strong opinions about that. And we are excited to welcome Lisa Brown from Ensign, Bickford. Hello, welcome to the Shakeup.
Hi, Jenny. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure.
So in our little pre-gaming call, as we do it, we here at the Shakeup, we're so excited about having another person in the universe who is shouting from the rooftops this critical message that we all need reminders of, which is don't compare yourself to other people. Can you share with our audience what is it that you feel is really important about that message?
You know, I think as I look back at my own career and about how I coach and mentor others within the organization, not just people that work for me, but, people across the board. And the age of social media, I think, has really accelerated this. It's hard to not feel like I've been in my position for a year. Why am I not being promoted? Why am I not getting the job that has the important sounding title? And I think that when people focus on their skill set and what the responsibilities they have, where they want to go in their career, and kind of marry that together more than comparing themselves to what their friends are doing at other companies that may not look and feel the same as the company that you work for. It might only have 20 people and everybody has an executive level title, and that it takes time to build the skill set and be a well-rounded person for that kind of job or the right job for you.
I love everything you just said. So one thing that just jumped out was, I've been in this role for a year. Why am I not promoted yet? In your experience as a person who has both been mentored and mentors and continues to lead, where do you think that, I'm going to name it as an illusion. Where do you think that illusion is coming from? When, as you're working with younger folks, where do you think that idea is coming from? That they're supposed to, I'm supposed to be promoted in a year. What do you think is the source of that?
I think it comes back down to what we started with. It's comparing yourself to your friends, to your peers, to what you see on LinkedIn, to what you see on Facebook or Instagram or social media. That's only a curated portion of somebody's life, right? And you're not in the day-to-day of how are they actually performing? What are they doing? What are their responsibilities? You only get bits and pieces and highlights of what your friends and family are doing. And so if you're stuck in comparing yourself to where somebody else is at in their journey versus you really lose sight of what your opportunities are in order to improve. And it can challenge you in your conversations with your management, with your mentors. It just doesn't set the right expectation for yourself. That's where I think that some of that comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So some of it is coming from just the straight up activity of comparing on social media. Part of why I think this is such an important conversation for folks who are working in manufacturing in our mighty little state of Connecticut is that manufacturing is a high pressure environment. It's a space where there are always timelines. There are a lot of deadlines, more so I think than in certain other kinds of industries. So there's already a pressure of work and a pressure of really having to manage a lot of moving parts and very intense environments. So this added layer of I'm supposed to do it a certain way strikes me as wildly unnecessary. And I like that you articulated how that can really cloud your judgment and really have a negative influence on the way that you interact with the people around you. And I think it's also a very modern problem because although humans have always compared ourselves, there's a certain amount of that's a normal human behavior for brain science reasons. The social media piece of it is what's different, because the messaging of I'm supposed to be doing a certain thing by a certain time, that is a very dangerous message. And so what have you done to overcome that message? If you were to be able to talk directly to our audience, and say you were talking with one of the people you mentor, maybe somebody who's a few years early into their career, what are the exact things that you give them as an alternative behavior, right? It's one thing to just say, well, don't compare yourself. Okay, well, what do I do instead? What's the instead behavior that you have found success with and that you help to use when you're guiding the people that you shepherd through their careers?
Yeah. So when I was, I've had a mentor in my life now for, the better part of 10 or 15 years, consistently. And she is always in my mind when I give this advice to others. And it's what I have used a bit as my mantra in my own career is when you take on a new role, the first year of your job is essentially learning your job. You don't know what you don't know yet. And you've applied, you've been selected for the role. You might meet all of the qualifications on paper, but you could potentially be learning a new company culture, a new company system to work in. You're learning new people. You're learning about new technology, maybe. So learning, your job in the first year should really be your starting point. And to get really good at your job and, become more of an expert in it, it probably takes another 1 to 2 years. So when you're thinking about where you are today in your career and what kind of job you want to aspire to be in, 2, 3, 5 years from now, you really should be looking at how long is it going to take me to get good at the job that I have today? And then at that point, what are my gaps in where I want to go? And start to fill them with asking for development opportunities and working and owning your own development plan. Making sure that overlaps with a career development plan. There's a lot of things that a person in a role can own and take charge of, and get support from the right leaders and also coaches and mentors that they found in their network. So I really think coming back to that kind of 1 to 3 year mark of that's the minimum amount of time that you really need in a role to be good at it and understand what your strengths and weaknesses are.
So 2 key things that I hear inside of that. One is about really understanding the role of time in your career trajectory. Yep. I think it's critical because it's almost counterintuitive to the pace of manufacturing, right? Absolutely. So the pace of manufacturing is timeline. We got to get it done. Timeline, deadline. But then when it comes to the career pathing part, it's almost the opposite messaging that has such a great role to play. Because wait, I need to really slow down. I need to reflect. I need to look realistically at the timelines of this notion of looking at your first year in a given job as my job is to learn the ropes. Yes. There's a let's manage our expectations realistically note around that I hope listeners you're hearing, because what I dig about your comment, Lisa, is this idea of how much more grace and pressure do we give ourselves and pressure do we take off through the approach that you're describing. And that strikes me as critical for not just, a young person you might be mentoring or I might be mentoring, but also critical for anyone that is trying to figure out what's my next move? How do I advance myself? That urgency that sometimes comes up is not necessary.
Agreed. Yeah. And I think that if you have that sense of urgency and you are sharing that with your next level leader or in a skip level meeting, and you aren't quite demonstrating that you understand your current role, that is a sign that you aren't self-reflecting enough in what your areas of opportunity are. And that can be detrimental to whether or not you're seen for advancement or even just additional responsibilities, because in a lot of ways, your next job is not going to always be a promotion. And I think there is a mindset that you should always be promoted when you take on a role. You always need more, and it's not necessarily more in, responsibility standpoint. Sometimes it's just different responsibilities, different skill sets. Another one of my mentors that I had along the way, she was really clear with me when I moved from engineering into more of a business type role. She said, you really, when you look at your career path and your career plan, you might have to take 1, 2, 3 different jobs that are not promotional. They might be lateral, but you might have to take those roles in order to be well-rounded enough to be the best candidate for the job you're targeting 5 years from now or 3 years from now. So I think there's a dichotomy between that sense of urgency around your career being equitable to the sense of urgency you have daily in a manufacturing type space or role versus how intentional you have to be when you're looking at your timeline for your career path.
You just used some of my favorite words in the entire language of English. One of them is demonstration, right? You just talked about we need to be able to show, we need to demonstrate that we are reflecting, we need to demonstrate readiness, and that is very often contrary to messaging that we might get in school. Right.
Yep.
We might get messaging in school that tells us, well, you check the boxes on all of this stuff. All of you learned how to do X, Y, and Z, but knowing and doing are completely different things. We're very fond of telling everybody that on the podcast.
Right.
And what I'm hearing you invite our audience to is this idea of slowing down and really going deeper. Right. More is just more. More is not better.
Right.
So what, in your experience, when you have made some of these wise lateral moves, what were some of the things that you were able to go deeper on that helped you become more well-rounded, that really allowed you to become a wiser leader, like the leader that you are now?
Yeah. So I mentioned already, I have an engineering background. And when I went out into my company at the time to seek different information about why we did what we did and learn about the front end of the business, I took a lateral move into a role that I had no idea how I was going to do. My mentor that I mentioned before, she saw something in me and took me under her wing, and there was a lot for me to learn. And I think what I dove deeper in there is engineering speak, and this hopefully speaks to the audience a bit. Engineering speak, and in manufacturing in particular, is much different than how we talk as a people leader and how we communicate with internal and external stakeholders like customers, how we might communicate with government officials, and, depending on your type of role. And that was the type of role I went into. I went from engineering into a government relations role. And for the first 6 months of that job, I was really scared I made the wrong decision. I wasn't sure that I was going to be good. I was really good at doing engineering. I was well regarded from that standpoint. And I felt like I was fumbling in the soft skills and the communication style that was required for a more government specific type role, a business development type role, much more strategic in nature. And so I think one of the key messages there is you might take on a lateral role that feels completely outside the box for you. But in doing so, it enables you to really open up to the opportunities that you have for growth. And if I had not done that role, there's no way I could have done, the 6 roles that came afterwards. I've pulled on that skill set time and time again and built upon it. And I think that it's really important to maybe sometimes take that risk and just to learn something new. And a lot of times that's lateral. There was no way that I could do the 2 jobs after that if I'd not done that critical step.
Wow. So the specific skills, there's some specific skills I just want to call out because I love that you did this and that you're mentoring others to being able to do this in your career track. The skill that I hear is discernment. You're like this, I needed to learn when to speak engineer versus when to speak people.
Yep.
What skill do I need to use situationally for what? I feel like that is a thing that gets overlooked. That discernment, that we make the distinction between what's needed when, is a critical leadership skill for anybody, men, women, puppies, whoever. That is a skill we all need.
Right.
And it's one that we can't really learn in school.
No.
We don't learn that from a textbook. We learn it through digging deeper. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like I love that example of speaking engineer versus speaking person. And the intentionality, we've heard that from other really great leaders on our podcast who the slowing down and being intentional about what is available to me here and how can I build upon it is, if I pull back to this whole idea of that is the opposite of comparing myself.
Mm-hmm.
That is really the opposite of comparing myself. Slow down, reflect, and build upon what's working well for me is completely the opposite from reading something on social media and saying, oh, I've got to be that. I need to follow that way. This is the right way. This is the right way. I should, this, that, and the other thing. What do you do? What's your best practice for dismissing the shoulds when you notice them come up?
You end up in a black hole of it, right? And you find yourself not focused and not paying attention on your daily work. And then also you stop comparing yourself to the thing that matters most, which was the version of yourself yesterday or a month ago or a year ago, right? Those are the comparisons that should really matter. That's the should that matter to you when you are thinking about how far you've come in your career, what you've learned. And it opens you up to, what do I have left to learn? What do I aspire to be? And then what is my gap? And sometimes it's a chasm. It feels like it's a very big gap to overcome. And so you've got to take it piecemeal. You've got to do that self-reflection. What should I work on first? And sometimes that really helps eliminate that should do noise that comes from comparing yourself to others when really the only person that you have to compare yourself to is you.
I love that. I hope that there are 50 young people in the immediate Greater Hartford area that are going to hear that message out of your mouth, because I wish we could get everybody on board with that. That's gold. I know we're going to wind down in a moment here, but I just want to share one more thing from you. If you had a closing hot piece of advice for a young engineer just coming out of school into their first job, given everything we've talked about today, what would be a thing they could log as a mantra to follow for themselves to do every day? What would that be?
I would say, and I hope it doesn't have to be like within a certain number of words, but I think asking questions is so critical to learning, and it helps you build your network. So networking at work, I think, is a bit undervalued. And if you don't network and you don't do it through asking questions, asking for clarifying questions, asking how to, you really lose the ability to understand who's doing something well, who do I want to learn from, and kind of getting to your mentor naturally. Because I think a lot of people, when they're younger in their career, earlier in their career, even when they're, mid to later career, maybe don't think they need a mentor, or they think that they're they don't know how to find one, so one's going to get assigned to them. That's not really how it works when it's effective. You have to go out and kind of search for people that you get rapport with, that you respect, that you can learn something from, maybe where you're weakest and they're strong. Have the courage to go talk to them, ask them questions, set up one-on-ones with them, be more bold in asking for that help and that connection within your organization. And that will help lift you, not just in how you operate in your role, but in how you are seen by other leaders and other even peers in the organization.
Mm-hmm. I love everything that you've shared with us today, Lisa. I am so glad that you have been able to join us. I'm going to give back to our audience today our shake-up factors. I actually have so many on the note page in front of me that I can't even write them down. But shake-up factor number 1 is to really, in the landscape of, if the command is don't compare yourself, discover what your alternative behaviors are and go back and listen to the podcast and write down at least 5 of the ones that we just uncovered in this conversation today, because I feel like Lisa just gave us a punch list of things that we can do in place of comparing ourselves. So that's shake up factor number 1 is instead of that, I'm going to do this and this and this. A couple of the hot this and this alternative behaviors that I really like are shake up factor number 2, which is be realistic in your timeline about your career. Really, the expectation that we all have to be climbing at a certain pace is nothing more than noise. You get to craft your career on your own terms and on a timeline that works for who and how you are, my friends. And then hot shake-up factor number 3 is really reflecting. Be willing to take that step back and say, what is important to me? And then ask that next right question. So reflect and ask. So there are about 1 million other on my pages, but I can't capture all the cool shake-up factors that Lisa gave us today. So Lisa Brown, thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you'll come back and talk with us some more about this really important topic.
Absolutely, I'd love to.
The Manufacturing Shakeup is sponsored by the Connecticut Office of Manufacturing, produced by Maselli Productions and Gale Communications, and hosted by the Boulder Company.